Ladies and gentlemen, they have done it. They have achieved the impossible. We all gave up on them. We thought it couldn't be done. There was no hope left, and this would be our reality forever and ever. But when all was thought to be lost, there he was, the man, the savior, here to liberate us from the curse of endless waifus. Qiuyuan, the first male character to come out in 7 months, since 2.1. All jokes aside, Qiuyuan is going to be the second character of version 2.7, and unlike with all the ones that came before him, we're taking a trip back to Hangwang, so it's nice that they're continuing to release units of the previous region as well. It appears the Aero category is still eating quite good, having gotten Yuno the version prior, and we're getting yet another Aero character and a sword wielder at that. But unlike most of the previous units, he's actually meant to take more of a supportive role, which obviously raises some interesting questions. Per usual, I'll be analyzing his gameplay and moveset to give you his best rotations and playstyle, along with my thoughts on his expected placement in the metagame before wrapping things up with a quick guide on how to build him, what parties you can play him with, and to decide whether Qiuyuan is worth your asteroids or not. Support and secondary characters throughout version 2 have primarily focused on specificity, in that they're meant to be played in a certain way and only that certain way. For instance, Chikona is primarily used for her consistent off-field damage and erosion stacking. Other secondaries like Yuno exist to facilitate the main attacker's win condition either by boosting their damage directly or pitching in some of their own. Considering the game has only 3 party members, dedicated general supports are kind of few and far between, which also explains why the last all-purpose support to come out was Shorekeeper back at 1.3. If they release too many of them, then it diminishes the value of the more niche units. That said, it wouldn't be in the game's best interest to make every secondary or support unit hyper-restrictive, as that too can have the inverse effect of diminishing their overall value by making them too dependent on the other pieces of the puzzle. When designing Qiuyuan, the goal was to try and find a middle ground, and I think they did a decent job at it. Qiuyuan's playstyle mainly revolves around Echo Skill casts and Echo Skill damage, putting him in the same category as the likes of Galbrena, Frolova, and Cantarella, which initially would have you believe he's not a versatile character given how Echo Skills are not as prominent of an attack type like Heavy Attack or Liberation damage. To remedy this, we'll open up the skill breakdown section with his ultimate. After dealing a blast of Echo Skill Aero damage to nearby enemies, Qiuyuan supplies a crit damage boost to the entire party for every 1% crit rate over 50%, capping at a 30-second 30% bonus at 65% crit or higher. Basically, it's identical to Rocha's Liberation, only instead of attack, it's crit damage. 30% crit damage is no small amount either. It's a higher increase than Shorekeeper's Stellarum, although granted no increase to crit rate, and requiring only 65% to get the full bonus is pretty lenient. On to the rest of his kit. The general premise of Qiuyuan is to reach max Forte, not only to gain access to empowered attacks, but to also provide the other party-wide bonus he carries. His Forte is a max capacity of 600, or functionally speaking 6, because anything generating Forte does so in multiples of 100. He can get 1 point by using basic attack 3, using any basic attack at 2 points of Forte or higher, or when doing a dodge counter. Also, he starts out with 4 points of Forte if you intro skill in. At 2 points, he gains a new set of basic attacks that deal increased damage and count as heavy attacks. At 4 points, Qiuyuan grants a 30-second 30% bonus to skill damage to the active character. So in total, he gives the active character / the entire party 30% echo skill and 30% crit damage, not counting his outro. Rather impressive buffing profile. Moving on though, at 6 points he enters an empowered state for 8 seconds, gaining 3 new heavy attacks that can be sequenced one after another for some damage. Also, said heavy attacks count as echo skill casts, making him very handy for attackers revolving around the need for them such as Galbrena and Frolova. Conveniently, Qiuyuan's Forte has no cooldown, merely the build-up time. Actually, when factoring his inherent skill 1, there is a cooldown in practice, but in a vacuum his Forte doesn't have one. You can effectively consider the bonus echo skill damage a passive on account of it being active pretty much endlessly. That's really all there is to this guy, not a sophisticated moveset whatsoever. Normal attacks are your typical stuff, nothing unique in there. His skill though has 2 parts to it, and there's some cool finesse. By itself it's just a forward dash with a couple hits on the way, but if you cast a skill while getting attacked, Qiuyuan performs sort of a counter where he cancels out the damage he was supposed to take and immediately stagnates all nearby enemies. It doesn't play into anything in his kit, it's just a cool skill div thing you could do. By the way, there's a hold version of his skill, the same basic principle as the tap version where he gap closes onto the nearest enemy for damage. However, if there isn't a target nearby, he does some Naruto shit by jumping from tree to tree, and you can release a skill key to have him lock onto the nearest enemy if there is one and do damage. Kind of neat I guess, but again it doesn't play into the rest of his kit, it's just there to generate energy and concerto. Okay, so having explained his main kit, to summarize, you want to attack to give your team an echo skill damage buff, and then to get your Forte and power and heavy attacks to gather echo skill casts, then finally liberation to increase everyone's crit damage. Nice and simple. Now, onto his inherent skills. Inherent Skill 1 has him enter a 10-second empowered state when at max Forte, causing enemies to take 50% more damage against his Echo Skill cast heavy attacks and restore 30 Concerto on hit. 90 Concerto by attacking 3 times almost immediately after intro skilling in gives Qiuyuan decently low field time, automatically making him much more effective, considering 90% of the reason why Sanhua is such a good 4-star is because she takes next to no field time at all. Inherent Skill 2 is just a 10% attack increase after casting an Echo Skill. Whatever, moving on. Intro skill's a fairly standard attack, but remember, Qiuyuan gains 4 points on his Forte gauge, meaning you only have to basic attack twice to get into full Forte, and after a few more heavy attacks he can switch out right away, to which you can take advantage of his situational yet overpowered outro skill. A 14-second 50% amplification to Echo Skill damage, which when paired alongside the 30% damage bonus on his Forte, makes him bar none the best secondary unit to bring for the likes of Galbrena and Vrolova. Incredibly powerful as there aren't that many sources of Echo Skill damage amp in the game, if any at all. That about summarizes Qiuyuan's gameplay. Supports and secondaries generally want to have a short rotation so as to not exhaust the buck timers on tertiary units like Shorekeeper and Verina. On that note, Qiuyuan's rotation should be relatively easy to execute within give or take like 7 to 8 seconds. I'm being kind of arbitrary here. So here's how you do it. Intro skill in and right away use Liberation if you have the energy available. Otherwise, cast your Echo, then go through 4 basic attacks. You technically only need 2 to fill out your Forte, but might as well finish the whole thing. Then heavy attack to gain access to your triple empowered heavy attacks, heavy attack 3 times, and then if you couldn't cast your Liberation before, you should be able to now. Finally swap out and there you go. Now if you're still short on Concerto and or energy, you could just use this skill somewhere in the beginning. To reiterate, Intro Skill, Liberation, Echo, Basic Attack 1, 2, 3, 4, Empowered Heavy Attack 1, 2, 3, and then Outro. Very simple. There are moments where you actually want to do a full rotation twice, namely if you choose to play him for a more DPS role, and later when I get into his sequences, one of them actually changes his rotation completely. For simplicity's sake though, it's more or less the same rotation, just done twice over. Now comes the part where we talk about his place in the meta. Naturally, being a support or secondary character, Qiuyuan's staying power will be higher than dedicated DPS units owing to how if and when there's another Echo Skill reliant attacker to supplant Vrolova and Galbrena, Qiuyuan will of course be able to latch onto them and continue forward. As an Echo Skill cast oriented guy, you might believe his range of use cases are somewhat limited, and in fairness you're not wrong. However, like I mentioned, with the help of relatively short field time and having an unconditional party-wide 30% crit damage buff, he's not entirely situational, and again, if Kuro continues to pump out more Echo Skill units, you can expect him to increase in value over time. So for my money, I'd say he's a good investment. He's an effective support now with the opportunity to mature in value over time. Insofar as meta versatility and team building are concerned, you're in good shape if you have either Galbrena or Vrolova, so if you pull for Galbrena and you have extra pulls to spare, Galbrena, Qiuyuan, and Shorekeeper make up one of the strongest teams in the game. She was already a monster in Mono Fusion or with Vrolova as a secondary, but Qiuyuan plays into her playstyle that much more. On that note, Qiuyuan's also good in Vrolova teams, easily dominating Tower of Adversity and whimpering waste in most circumstances. Basically, if you have either Galbrena or Vrolova, you'll definitely want to consider pulling Qiuyuan. Aside from that, a passing great team to go for if you have neither of them is to play him with Qiuyuan and Shorekeeper. Though they aren't compatible in terms of Echo skills, Qiuyuan's boost to heavy attacks can play into Qiuyuan's primarily heavy attack kit, and if you want, you can swap out Shorekeeper for Chikona, seeing as Qiuyuan can do the healing for you guys. They're not optimal uses of the character, but they are effective enough should you have neither of the two main attackers. So as you can see, a deceptively usable team, especially if you have the more recent characters. On to sequences. Pragmatically speaking, support should be designed to be usable without any sequences, but I'll go through them anyway just to point out some noteworthy ones. S1 provides super armor to Qiuyuan when using his empowered heavy attacks, and he also passively gains 20% crit to assist in getting to that 65% breakpoint. S2 plays more into Qiuyuan's buffing repertoire by adding an extra 30% Echo Skill damage amp to the entire team, making it so the Forte buff gives 30% bonus Echo Skill damage and 30% Echo Skill damage amplification. Those are two different parameters by the way, the latter one being identical to his outro buff. S3 adds meaningful damage to Qiuyuan's kit to the point where he becomes a veritable main attacker damage-wise. At the cost of extending his rotation time, Qiuyuan can now dish out as much DPS as a top tier S0 DPS character. That's kind of overpowered given that he's ultimately a secondary unit. Not Qiuyuan levels of overpowered, but still a massive jump. S4 is... well, it's just 20% attack, nothing much else to say. S5, 15% defense ignore across Qiuyuan's entire kit. Again, if you're going for number 4 or 5, I'm guessing you're planning to go all the way. Final sequence tags on a bit more damage to his kit, but in my opinion, the real benefit of S6 can be found in the 5-second stagnation. It wears off the instant enemies get attacked, but that kind of temporary stop is always appreciated. Overall, if you're playing him purely for buffing, you can stay at S0 and go for a signature weapon instead. If you are trying to sweat though, S2 is where the big boost is to his supportive capability, and S3 is where he becomes a veritable sub-DPS. Depends on how much you're willing to spend. Speaking of a signature weapon, let's talk about weapon options next. Qiuyuan's signature is extremely beneficial for his kit since in a similar fashion to Dia and Brand, he's the only echo skill based sword user in WuWa at the present moment, and no other options even remotely play into echo skills. To be fair, most of what Emerald Sentence affords him are stats, lots of attack, lots of crit, and heavy attack damage. However, it's the party-wide 30-second 20% echo skill damage bonus that makes this weapon really stand out. Party-wide buffs on a weapon can be very beneficial not just to the unit of choice, but also for potential future ones. On that note, Emerald Sentence is just a really solid stat stick, especially for heavy attackers, as you can get the 30% bonus on any unit, not just Qiuyuan, so there's a bit of splashability in play. Beyond that, just go the other Emerald Sword, Emerald of Genesis. Good stats, nice crit, and some energy to help you get your ultimate off more frequently. I would recommend R1 over S1 like always. Finally, we have Echoes. There are a variety of different build paths to go for being a supportive unit. First one is to just go the full Moonlit Cloud set. Still to this day one of the best Echo support sets in the game. Best to do that if you're doing Galbrenna, Qiuyuan, Shorekeeper, in which case Impermanent Terran as usual. Second option is to do 3-piece Law of Harmony with a 2-piece Aero set, speccing more into personal damage. More of a vertical investment strategy, so this applies mainly to people who intend to go for like S3. Or realistically, any team that isn't strictly Galbrenna, Qiuyuan, and Shorekeeper, like if you're doing Lupa instead, or if you're going say for Lova, Danjin, or Rocha, and then Qiuyuan. Regardless of choosing this build, then go Fenrico as your main echo. Third option is to do 3-piece Law of Harmony and 2-piece Moonlit with Bellborn Geocellon as your main echo. This approach is intended for Qiuyuan and for Lova teams, like Qiuyuan for Lova Cantarella, so you can choose to build him in a more utility-centric way or a more DPS-centric way. Regarding main stats, definitely prioritize getting to 65% crit. Go for crit rate on 4 cost, arrow damage on 3 cost, and attack on 1 cost. For subs, it depends on whether you're using Moonlit Clouds or not, but generally speaking you'll want to pick up around 25 to 30% energy, then go for crit, attack percent, and heavy attack damage in that order. This applies to both versions of Qiuyuan by the way, the main and substats are identical. Alright, that about wraps up my analysis. Overall, a very effective situational support that plays into two of the best attackers in the game right now, Galbrenna and Frolova, while having a modicum of general utility to be played in some more rogue strategies. Of course, being a support unit, Qiuyuan has the potential to mature in value over time if Kuro continues to release more echo skill based units. I would very much consider looking into him if you have at least one of the aforementioned two. Anyway, let me know your thoughts on Qiuyuan in the comments down below, including if you plan to pull for him or not. But we're gonna end things off here, so if you enjoyed the video, I would appreciate it if you would like and subscribe. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter @FarSaram, join my Discord server, and check out my other Wuthering Waves guide content if you haven't yet. Until next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.
Your life is mine to take. Off with you.
Gotcha.
My moon is the
Behave now.